Okay, so there are 76 multiple choice, and there are 12 short answer, 1 to 2 words, 3 words, maybe a full sentence type of questions. Now, the short answers are very similar to the ones that we've had before. Okay, so the first short answer gives you a picture of 2 snapdragons. Red snapdragon, white snapdragon. You have to look at the picture and answer the questions based on the picture of those snapdragons. Okay, dealing with incomplete dominance or codominance. The second picture, you're going to be given a picture of 3 tortoises that Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands. You have to look at those tortoises and look at their features and answer questions about those tortoises. I recall you seeing that before. Third group of, and they're in a group of 3s. So the third group of short answers, you will be given the classification pyramid of the bear, and you're going to have to answer questions about that organism looking at that classification pyramid. Very similar to what we've done before. Okay, the last group of 3 is new. Okay, it deals with invertebrates and vertebrate animals. So you're going to be given a picture of a sponge, a cnidarian, and a bird, and you're going to have to answer questions such as what type of feeder is a cnidarian, which one of these organisms have intracellular digestion, what organ is used by one of these organisms to eat a certain type of food. Okay, so obviously review your charts about digestion for invertebrates and vertebrates. Okay, so those are the short answers. Let's move on to the multiple choice, some of the areas of focus. Make sure you know everything there is to know about a gene. Okay, that there are 2 forms of a gene, 2 or more forms. They are called alleles. You have dominant alleles, you have recessive alleles. So if I give you a genotype with 2 lowercase letters, you should understand that that means recessive. If I give you a genotype of 2 capital letters, you should know that that is dominant. Review the Punnett squares. So make sure that you can go back over, put a basic Punnett square together, have the genotypes for one parent on one side, the genotypes for the other parent on the other side. Review probability as it applies to Punnett squares. Define the principles of probability. Make sure you know the definitions of homozygous, heterozygous, and hybrid. Again, you'll be given a Punnett square. I'll give you the genotype of the parents on one side, the genotype of the parents on the other side. You'll have to complete that Punnett square and answer questions about it. Who was Gregor Mendel, and what did he do? If I give you a question about chickens and codominance as it applies to their feather color, and I tell you that you have one that is a chicken that has black feathers and then a chicken that is white feathers, what would the heterozygous be? Again, that's dealing with codominance. So you have to review the difference between codominance and incomplete dominance. Make sure you review haploid and diploid. If I give you the diploid number is 12, then you should know that the haploid number is half that number. Or if I give you the number of a haploid, and it says, hey, what's the diploid of this organism, you should be able to go in reverse. Describe types of gametes. Gametes are sex cells, sperm and egg. What process produces them? Does mitosis produce sex cells or gametes? Or does meiosis produce sex cells or gametes? Review what Frederick Griffith contributed to our knowledge of transformation. In other words, what did Frederick Griffith do concerning transformation? What did Avery and Chase do concerning transformation? What were their conclusions? What did they come up with? Again, when I said Frederick Griffith, remember he used radioactive materials. He injected certain things he injected heat-killed or harmful or harmless bacteria into mice. What is a bacteriophage? And then what do bacteriophages infect? What structure stores our genetic information? Okay, where is the genetic information stored in a cell? What would happen if DNA is missing? Okay, if a piece of DNA is missing, what is that going to cause? Describe how DNA is like a book. Study a diagram of the DNA molecule where it has the A's, the T's, the C's, the G's on one side. Okay, make sure you can identify the nucleotides. So if I give you a picture and I ask you, well, which one of these are the nucleotides? A sugar, a phosphate, and a base. Make sure you review Chargaff's rules, which explains how much of adenine complements how much of thymine, how much of guanine complements how much of cytosine. And review what pairs with what. A's with T, C's with G's, or in the case of RNA, A with U, and then C with G. Explain what Rosalind Franklin contributed to our understanding of DNA. Which two scientists are given credit for the structure of DNA? Which scientist studied X-ray diffraction? Again, if I give you a strand of DNA, cytosine, thymine, adenine, guanine, and thymine, make sure you can write underneath or choose from the complements. So again, you have to review what pairs with what. Explain where the DNA in eukaryotic organisms is located. Okay, where would you find the DNA in a eukaryotic organism like us? Where would you find the DNA in a prokaryotic organism? Excuse me. Explain why Charles Darwin is famous. Where did he travel? What was the name of his ship? Describe the theory of natural selection, which he is given credit for coming up with. Do you know who James Hutton and Charles Lyell are? And what did they do? Who is Lamarck? And what is his evolutionary hypothesis? What is an acquired characteristic? What's the difference between artificial selection and natural selection? What does the selecting in natural selection? What does the selecting in artificial selection? How is adaptation important for an organism's survival? Again, how is adaptation important for an organism's survival? And then, how are adaptations passed on? Describe survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. What does that mean? Give an example of it. Based on Darwin's theories, which type of organisms tend to survive most? Make sure you review there are four or five principles of natural selection. Make sure you're familiar with those, such as descent of modification. Review vestigial structures. What are they? Make sure you know examples of them. You know, whale's pelvic bone is an example. If I give you a picture of a structure, make sure you can identify that it's a vestigial structure. Explain why Latin is used when we're describing animals and organisms on the planet, not just animals, but why is Latin used? Why is that language used when we're describing organisms? And who is Linnaeus? What did he do? Why do scientists use a classification system? What is the purpose of it? What does a scientific name have to refer to in order to be useful? What does a scientific name have to refer to in order to be useful? Define binomial nomenclature. Based on the rules of binomial nomenclature, which part of the species name must be capitalized? And which part of the species name must be lowercased? If I give you two names, like Homo sapien, and then I say Homo sapien neanderthalis, make sure you can choose which group they belong to. Do they belong to the same class? Do they belong to the same family? Do they belong to the same genus? Do they belong to the same species? Okay? So where does it separate those two? Homo sapien neanderthalis. Remember, you go from broad classification where domain is the biggest thing. You have 3 domains. And then you go, King Philip came over for good spaghetti. Make sure you remember that mnemonic. Did King Philip come over for good spaghetti? Or whatever you use to remember that. Make sure you understand to go down that pyramid and up that pyramid. What are the 2 highest levels of taxa in Linnaeus' system? The 2 highest levels. How many levels are there in Linnaeus' system? Describe the characteristics and features of the following organisms. Amphibia. What are characteristics and features of amphibia? Mammalia. Aves, or aves, which is birds. Reptiles. What are features that separate all of those vertebrate animals? Cladistic analysis. What is a cladogram and what is cladistic analysis? What does it accomplish? What does it do? Know the 6 kingdoms of organisms. There are 2 bacteria kingdoms. Then you have kingdom Protista, kingdom Plantae, the fungus kingdom, and kingdom Animalia. Make sure you understand what are key features that separate and categorize these kingdoms. But initially, Linnaeus came up with 2 kingdoms. What were those 2 kingdoms that Linnaeus came up with? If I tell you that a domain has a single-celled organism that lives in extreme conditions, make sure you are able to choose from the 4 domains and select the right one. Study the picture of a bacterium, okay, so that you can identify basic structures of a bacterium. Same thing with a virus, just a basic structure of a virus. Study the 3 main shapes of bacteria and be able to identify those 3 main shapes visually with a picture. What do decomposers do for the environment? And what type of organisms would a decomposer fall? What kingdom would they be a part of? So again, describe the structure of a virus. Know what the protein code is. Know where the envelope is. Know the capsid. Okay? So if you look at a bacteriophage, make sure you can identify it. Describe how bacteria cause disease. And if they cause disease, what do we call them? What do we call disease-causing organisms or disease-causing bacteria? Okay, because we have bacteria that cause disease, we have viruses that cause disease. What structures do protists use for movement? Okay, do they use pseudopods? Do they use cilia? Do they use flagella? If an organism has a flagella, what do we call that? How do amoeba move? Describe the features of a fungus kingdom. Okay, all fungus do what? What role do fungi play in the environment? What process do plants use to get their own food? Are plants multicellular? Are they unicellular? Describe the environment that algae would live in. Algae is a protist. Where would you find it? What type of environment? What do bryophytes? Bryophyte is spelled B-R-Y-O-P-H-Y-T-E-S. What do they use for a root system? Okay, what do bryophytes use to serve as roots. They don't have roots, but they use something else. Differentiate between xylem, which is XYLEM, and phloem, which is PHLOEM. One of those structures is responsible for carrying water and minerals. The other for carrying carbohydrates. If I give you 4 plant structures, make sure you are able to describe which plant structure is the plant's embryo, serves as the food source and the covering for the plant's embryo. How do animals obtain their nutrients? What do they have to do? Do they carry out photosynthesis, or do they have to consume things? Differentiate between radial symmetry, bilateral symmetry, and then asymmetry. Also differentiate between acollimates that don't have a body cavity, collimates which have a body cavity, and pseudocollimates which kind of have a partial body cavity. If I give you a picture of a jellyfish, make sure you can tell me what type of symmetry that jellyfish has. Be able to explain to me, or not to me, on the test tomorrow, the exam, be able to explain what type of body symmetry the very basic, simple animals have. No. What type of symmetry does a sponge have? What type of symmetry does a cnidarian have, or does it have symmetry? What about an echinoderm like a starfish? Does it have symmetry? What is the purpose of aquatic organisms pumping water over their gills? What purpose does that serve? Again, aquatic organisms pumping water over their gills. Why do they do that? If I give you 4 different organisms that live in the water, tell me which one of these organisms use lungs to breathe. Differentiate between an open circulatory system and a closed circulatory system. What are the benefits of either? Make sure you know the difference between a 2-chambered heart, 3-chambered heart, and the type of heart we have, which is a 4-chambered heart.